Retro cars that once failed in sales but are now worth a huge amount of money. No company is immune to releasing a bad product. Even Apple, which seems to churn out breakthrough after breakthrough, has had its fair share of failed ideas. The same applies to the automotive industry, and here everything is much more serious than with some chocolate bars and pants, because serious production facilities and the brains of dozens of professionals are involved. Everyone who is interested in automobile subjects knows how valuable are the first models of legendary Ford Mustang or Ferrari 250. But there are also such retro cars that failed in sales, and after decades the public finally appreciated them on their own merits. Thanks to interest, the cost of these autos went beyond the wallets of average consumers. Duesenberg Model J 1928. In 1928, the Duesenberg Motor Corporation produced a luxury car to compete with Rolls-Royce and other expensive brands. It was one of the fastest and most expensive cars at the time, powered by a 265 horsepower engine that accelerated the car to 192 km per hour. As for the cost, it was simply cosmic for those years, up to $25,000. Today it is about $400,000. For this reason, as well as because of the Great Depression that began in 1929, the company produced only a few hundred cars, and in 1937 went bankrupt. Such expensive cars, when respectable companies fell one after another, were not needed by anyone. The value of the Duesenberg Model J today is difficult to estimate, but at auctions in the early 2000s two of these cars were sold for $4.5 million each. Even in poor condition, a Duesenberg Model J today would be worth at least $1.5 million. Ford Edsel 1958. In 1958, Ford Motor Company thought about creating a subsidiary brand, producing cars of above average class, but not expensive, as General Motors did with Oldsmobile. Alas, but Ford did not succeed, and in 1960 the project was closed, and the Edsel is considered one of the biggest failures in the history of automobile industry. It should be noted that Ford Edsel is not one, but four models: Citation, Corsair, Pacer, Ranger. One of the main reasons for the failure was the truly huge size of the cars, the wheelbase of which was almost 3 meters. In addition, they had powerful and voracious engines, as well as they were supplied only in the maximum configuration. As a result, the cheapest Ranger model at the time of its release cost $2,484. At the same time, competitors in the face of the same Ford Custom 300 cost from 1977. All this and other shortcomings led to a resounding failure, and only 116,000 cars were sold. Today there are no more than 6,000 Ford Edsel left, each of which is kept in collections. Even if you find one at auction somewhere, you'll have to shell out over $40,000 for a car in mediocre condition. Plymouth Fury 1959. The Plymouth Fury was introduced in 1959 and was typical of the late 50s and early 60s in terms of both design and engine power. In its most basic configuration, it was powered by a 50-liter version 8 engine that produced 305 horsepower. Can you imagine the pleasure the owner could feel from driving such a beautiful and powerful car? The problem was that the company Chrysler Corporation, whose division was Plymouth, was too quick to release the Fury, and the result was a beautiful, but rather mediocre in terms of reliability. In addition, the recession began in 1958, which led to a sharp economic downturn after the boom caused by the recovery after the end of World War I. This led to poor sales of the first-generation Plymouth Fury. The second generation was worked through and became more reliable, making demand for this model increase. The first generation, however, is now one of the most coveted in the collection of Masca aficionados. Bricklin SV1 1974. Think the DeLorean DMC-12 was the first mass-produced car with a gull-wing door opener? Well, it wasn't, because the first was the Bricklin SV1, a Canadian semi-sports car that was produced from 1974 to 1976 and was intended for the US market. It was an unusual car, the body of which was made of fiberglass. It had shock-absorbing bumpers, already mentioned above, gull-wing, type doors and other interesting additions. The problem was the high price, which was too repulsive even for well-off people, because the Bricklin brand was new, and few people wanted to take risks. As a result, the first generation was produced in the size of only 140 pieces. For all this time the company produced a little less than 3,000 cars, of which to date less than 1,700 have survived. And each of them will cost at least $35,000. Aston Martin Lagonda 1974. In the 70s, the Aston Martin company was not going through the best of times. British prestige cars in those years did not enjoy much success because of the financial crisis, as well as because of the pressure of competitors from Italy and the United States. Then the company went for radical measures and created Aston Martin Lagonda, a luxury car. One look at this car is enough to understand why it failed. The design was peculiar, to say the least, especially against the background of the elegant classics produced earlier. Meanwhile, the Aston Martin Lagonda had some very enticing features, such as a hand-built 5.4-litre version 8 engine with 280 horsepower. Alas, the model suffered from problems that were completely out of place in luxury models, namely, it rusted, had not particularly reliable electrics and a fast-wearing engine. That's why only 645 were sold. Today Aston Martin Lagonda is a desirable car in collections and is in high demand because of its rarity and unusual design. Such a car can hardly be bought cheaper than $95,000. Rolls-Royce Camargue 1975. Rolls-Royce has always produced premium cars for the most sophisticated public. But this was not enough for the company, and in 1975 the Rolls-Royce Camargue was born, a first-class coupe, made in exquisite style. At the time of its release, the Rolls-Royce Camargue was considered one of the most expensive cars in its class, and in today's money it would cost at least $60,000. But if the car was so posh, then why did it fail? It was all down to the British press, including car critics, who attacked the Rolls-Royce Camargue, calling it a clunky model with a repulsive design. Because the affluent public of those years focused on trade magazines as we do today on online reviews, sales of the Rolls-Royce Camargue were meager, with only 531 cars produced. Today, however, the cheapest Rolls-Royce Camargue, which would be in pretty sad condition, would go for at least $120,000 at auction. DeLorean DMC-12 1981. Since we mentioned the DeLorean DMC-12 above, it would be a crime not to talk about this legendary retro car. The DeLorean DMC-12 was conceived by John DeLorean, a former General Motors employee, as a sports car that would not look like the models produced by corporations only with the approval of the marketing department. He and his team of engineers and designers created an unusual car made of brushed stainless steel and with gull-wing type doors. Alas, but production of the DeLorean DMC-12 was discontinued 2 years after the start of sales, and about 9,000 models were made. The problem was the company's debts, as well as scandals related to its founder. There were also noted problems with the car itself, such as poor handling due to the engine layout, concerns about door safety, and so on. But all this did not prevent the DeLorean DMC-12 from becoming a legend after the release of the cult trilogy, Back to the Future. And it became so legendary that it was honored with a revival in 2008. However, these are still not the original cars, each of which is worth at least $50,000 today. Rare cars you'll never see on the roads.